In our headlines on this Friday afternoon, January 13th, Seoul's central bank appears committed to curbing the country's inflation even at the risk of a recession. The rate now stands at 3.5%. Over in the US, the pace of acceleration of consumer prices is slowing down, raising hopes for a less aggressive monetary policy by the Federal Reserve in the months ahead. And the United Nations reiterates the importance of diplomacy in addressing North Korea's aggression, calling on the regime to return to the dialogue table. As largely expected, the Bank of Korea has raised its benchmark interest rate yet again by 25 basis points, with officials placing priority on stabilizing consumer prices. Our Finance Ministry correspondent Arirang reports.
The highest benchmark rate in 15 years. The Bank of Korea on Friday announced a raise of the base interest rate to 3.5%, a hike of 25 basis points. This is the central bank's 7th rate hike in a row, the longest consecutive set of rate raises ever. From last year to this Friday, the bank has raised rates by 250 basis points in total, but the central bank may not pivot anytime soon as it desperately tries to bring down inflation to its target 2%. The inflation rate as of last December stood at 5%. It is a step down from its latest peak over 6% in last July, but on-year inflation rates have still been running at over 5% for 8 months in a row. The Bank of Korea is also trying to match the U.S. Federal Reserve. The Fed's base interest rates currently lie at 4.25 to 4.5%. With the BOK's rate hike on Friday, South Korea's base interest rate now falls about 1 percentage point behind the Fed's rate. But with experts forecasting that the Fed could raise rates to 5%, it could only be a matter of time before the gap between the two rates widen again. This could be problematic for South Korean economy in the long run because if the gap between the rates widens, this could lead to capital flowing out of South Korea, weakening the value of the Korean won. So experts forecast that rates may go even higher, possibly up to 3.75% this year. Lee-hyun, Arirang News.
And on the local trade front, export and import prices eased for the second straight month in December on the back of a stronger Korean won, a drop in oil prices and a slowdown in global demand. According to the Bank of Korea, on Friday, the export price index stood at 118.03 last month. Now, this marks an on-month drop of 6% and is the largest drop since April 2009. Similarly, import prices edged down to 6.2% on month in December, largely in response to lower oil prices, with the average price of Dubai crude, South Korea's benchmark, surrendering more than 10% on month in December. Meanwhile, in the U.S., the impact of the Federal Reserve's aggressive rate hikes appears to be taking shape there. Figures for December show inflation slowing down. Our Yeon-jin has more.
The U.S. Department of Labor said on Thursday that the U.S. Consumer Price Index rose 6.5% in December on year. It has been shrinking for 6 months in a row since peaking at 9.1% in June and is now at its lowest level in 14 months. The index also dropped 0.1% on month, the first on-month drop since May 2020 at the beginning of the COVID-19 global pandemic. The measure of core inflation, which strips out volatile food and energy prices, rose 0.3% from the previous month, which translates to a 5.7% annual pace. This figure is regarded as the best indicator for the trajectory of inflation. Policymakers continue to consider interest rate hikes and whether they're needed to tame inflation, and the latest signs of cooling inflation may allow the Federal Reserve to slow down the pace of its interest rate hikes. This comes as a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, with hopes that it could ease the financial burden for American households with the rising cost of living, and hopes that the economy could avoid a dreaded recession this year. Yeon-jin, Arirang News.
And back on the local front, the government is looking to tangibly boost the portion of power from nuclear plants within the next 12 years or so. My colleague Ji-young has more on the ambitious agenda.
Nuclear plants and renewable energy could each account for more than 1/3 of total power generation in South Korea by 2036. On Thursday, the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy announced its 10th basic plan for long-term electricity supply and demand, which includes reforms to the country's electricity mix with the aim of achieving greater reductions of emissions. Under President Yoon Suk-yeol's pledge to make South Korea a nuclear reactor superpower, the aim is to raise the proportion of nuclear power to almost 35% of the country's total production capacity by 2036. In 2018, nuclear power accounted for about 23%. A third of capacity is also to come from renewable sources, a sharp increase from the 6% recorded in 2018. Hydrogen and ammonia will account for more than 7%. In the nearer term, the goal by 2030 is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from 2018 levels by 40%. By 2030, nuclear is expected to rise to more than 32% of the total. The ministry said to achieve the plan, construction at the Shinhanul nuclear power plant on reactors 3 and 4, having been stalled by political disagreements, is to be resumed in 2024. The plan also aims to increase renewable energy to more than 20% and the proportion of coal to be reduced to under 20%. The renewable energy mix, currently concentrated on solar panels, will expand more into wind power. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, China's surrender of its zero-COVID strategy has pundits addressing its broader implications on the global market, especially amid the bleak prospects for this year. Our senior business correspondent Kim Hyun-sung explains.
For 1,016 days, China's borders had been clamped shut in an effort to ward off COVID-19. But last Sunday, they finally reopened, bringing newfound optimism for the economy.
The opening up and the reopening of the Chinese economy is a strong positive lever for 2023.
This is Myeongdong, an area that used to be popular among Chinese tourists. Since the start of the pandemic, this once bustling district had for a while become almost a ghost town. But with overseas tourism returning, so has foot traffic here. And with Chinese borders reopening, this area holds the potential of once again returning to its heyday.
With China only just reopening and with South Korea restricting arrivals from China due to concerns about COVID-19, the full buying power of Chinese tourists has not yet reached Korea's tourism sector. But locals wait, hopefully, for when it does.
It was really tough. For almost 3 years, I had to work in delivery and construction because I couldn't sell. I only came back in recent months to sell, and my wife and I are hopeful that this area will fully bounce back when Chinese tourists once again visit.
Already, businesses that had left Myeongdong are returning. The vacancy rate for local stores had climbed during South Korea's lockdowns, but it's starting to tick down in recent days, and industry experts expect it to go down even further once the Chinese tourists can travel without COVID restrictions. But not everyone shares an optimistic outlook. Some are concerned that China's reopening could push up commodity prices even further.
As China eliminates its zero-COVID policy, their production will increase, and that will help reduce inflation. But there's a contrary point of view. In the short run, it may even increase inflation because China's demand for oil and commodities may rise before their production.
Goldman Sachs has projected that oil prices would climb by about $15 per barrel as China regains its appetite for oil imports. China's lockdown was a never-before-seen experiment, so experts vary in their projections on how this new reopening will swing the global economy. But there's one view they all share. China's reopening is likely to make a big splash. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
The international community is renewing its calls on North Korea to return to the negotiating table over its aggressive ambitions. Our Kim Jong-chul has more on the recent remarks by the head of the United Nations. Do take a listen.
The UN chief aimed strong words at North Korea during a Security Council meeting on Thursday as he pressed Kim Jong-un to return to dialogue.
The onus is on the DPRK to comply with its international obligations and return to the negotiation table.
He said the unlawful nuclear weapons program being pursued by the regime is a clear and present danger, driving risks and geopolitical tensions to new heights. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, criticized China and Russia, saying they're protecting and abetting Pyongyang, which grossly disregards their international obligations.
China and Russia repeatedly stopped the Security Council from condemning the DPRK's unlawful actions in 2022.
According to Reuters, North Korea's mission to the UN did not respond to a request for comment on Guterres' remarks, while China's UN ambassador Zhang Jun also distanced himself from giving a response. Last year, China said the key to solving the issue of nuclear provocations from North Korea was in the hands of the U.S., urging Washington to show, quote, sincerity and flexibility moving forward. Meanwhile, at another event on Thursday, a White House official forecasted a grim outlook for relations with Pyongyang. Deputy Assistant to the U.S. President and Coordinator for the Indo-Pacific, Kurt Campbell, said North Korea at this point appears to be disinterested in diplomacy, not only with the U.S., but also with South Korea and Japan. South Korean ambassador to the U.S. Cho Tae-yong also urged North Korea to engage in dialogue with no strings attached, saying the regime can still choose a future for its economic development. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has commemorated KoreanAmerican Day by acknowledging the contributions to community made by Koreans in America over the course of time following the arrival of 102 Koreans in Hawaii 120 years ago. According to a statement by the White House on Thursday local time, Mr. Biden also took the occasion to stress that the Seoul-Washington alliance has become stronger following his state visit to South Korea last May. He further shared a message for future collaboration using the Korean phrase 같이 갑시다, meaning let's go together. Dispute is deepening between the government and survivors of Japan's wartime forced labor as authorities share plans to compensate the latter through its own public foundation instead of turning on the Japanese companies in question. Our senior foreign affairs correspondent Pyongyang has the latest.
At a public hearing at the National Assembly on Thursday, an official from South Korea's foreign ministry revealed the government's plan to compensate the victims of Japan's wartime forced labor through a public foundation, rather than from the Japanese firms responsible. The public foundation will be funded by donations from domestic companies. The Director General for Asia and Pacific Affairs, Seo Min-jung, said the government came up with the solution as its priority is to arrange the payments as soon as possible, as many victims have already passed away or are in their 90s.
Through detailed review, we found that the key to resolving this issue is to arrange the payments first, even if that means getting the funds from a third party. We will meet the victims and their families to ask for consent.
But victims supporting civic groups and opposition party lawmakers protested the plan. Some boycotted the event, saying this issue cannot be resolved without a sincere apology and participation from the accused Japanese firms, adding this way of compensation is completely ignoring the victims' human rights. Thursday's public hearing comes after the Supreme Court made landmark rulings in 2018, ordering two Japanese companies, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Nippon Steel, to compensate the Korean victims of forced labor during the Japanese colonial rule. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
Also, on the diplomatic front, last September, President Yoon Suk-yeol and his Canadian counterpart, Justin Trudeau, agreed to bolster bilateral ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership ahead of the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations this year. Now, that being said, our Cho Min-jung walks us through Seoul's past and present interactions with Ottawa. Do take a look.
2023 is set to be a very exciting and promising year for South Korea and Canada relations. This year marks the 60th anniversary of diplomatic ties between the two countries.
60 years is a significant milestone, and we have much to be proud of. In reality, our relationship is even older.
Over the past few decades, South Korea and Canada have formed bonds as like-minded allies through the promotion of peace and security on the Korean peninsula. Canada stood side by side with South Korea during the Korean War. The country dispatched more than 26,000 soldiers and endured sizable casualties.
So South Korea is very grateful for that act of bravery and friendship. That, I think, is the reason why both countries upgraded the bilateral relations to a comprehensive and strategic partnership in last year.
In September 2022, President Yoon Suk-yeol and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau upgraded the bilateral relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. It focused on advancing 5 shared priorities in the areas of values, security, prosperity, sustainability, and beyond.
These are shared challenges that can only be addressed when countries work together. As like-minded countries, Korea and Canada are optimal partners in tackling these common challenges.
The two countries have also developed stable trade relations for over half a century. Today, South Korea is Canada's 7th largest trading partner. Trade between the two countries was boosted by the Korea-Canada Free Trade Agreement, which came into force in 2015. Last year, both countries respectively unveiled Indo-Pacific strategies. Both strategies provide a roadmap for stepping up proactive engagement beyond their own countries. They also provide blueprints for strengthening partnerships to uphold rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific. On Thursday, South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol exchanged congratulatory messages with Canada's Governor-General, Mary Simon, and Yoon expressed confidence in further developing the country's comprehensive strategic partnership. Simon stressed that 2023 will be very important for South Korea and Canada for achieving common goals. The messages were delivered on their behalf at the anniversary reception hosted by the Embassy of Canada to South Korea, attended by South Korea's Foreign Minister Park Jin. Like the tagline for the 60th anniversary, Stronger Together, the event showcased South Korea and Canada's strong commitment to moving forward together into the future. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
In other news, neonatal jaundice is said to be common in newborns, and researchers here have come up with a way to treat it with a textile-based wearable patch that uses a blue OLED device. Our Chung Won-ju tells us what this means.
Jaundice in newborn babies is a common condition. Jaundice causes yellowing of the skin due to the buildup of a pigment in the blood called bilirubin. Jaundice symptoms normally pass on their own but are often treated through phototherapy to prevent complications. A blue light with a special wavelength is shined on the skin so bilirubin can be broken down by the kidneys. Phototherapy, however, requires the baby to wear an eye patch in an incubator to protect their eyesight from the strong light. The babies also have to be isolated from their parents for more than a day. A South Korean research team has developed a wearable OLED fabric that emits a blue light of 470 nanometers, which is effective in treating jaundice. The fabric is flexible and can even be washed with water.
After coating the fabric that's actually used in making clothes with a material that can flatten it, an OLED is produced by stacking various organic layers, including electrodes, onto it.
The fabric works with the low voltage of one small battery and can treat jaundice even if its light intensity is reduced to 1/10 of existing treatment devices. After shining the newly developed OLED on neonatal serums, the research team confirmed that bilirubin levels dropped to treated levels within 3 hours. This means that newborn jaundice could be treated by simply wearing clothes made from this fabric.
Existing technology needs installation, so is limited by time and space. The developed OLED has the same effect as existing devices, but can be made into wearable baby clothes.
The research team is preparing clinical trials of the newly developed wearable blue OLED and expects to commercialize it within 2 years. Chung Won-ju, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In the US, a special counsel has been appointed to look into President Joe Biden's alleged retention of classified documents. On Thursday, former federal prosecutor Robert Hur was appointed by Attorney General Merrick Garland to look into whether these secret documents were removed and retained without authorization. The appointment came moments after the White House announced that another batch of secret papers were discovered at the U.S. leader's private residence in Delaware in December last year. It follows Monday's announcement that 10 classified documents were found at a private office in Washington in November, which was formerly used by Biden. In both cases, the White House says the president has cooperated with the National Archives and Department of Justice. According to the White House, the documents were, quote, inadvertently displaced. The documents discovered relate to Biden's time as vice president during the Obama administration. The United Arab Emirates is hosting this year's COP28 climate summit and has announced that the president of the summit will be the head of an oil company. Sultan Ahmed Al Jaber is CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, one of the world's largest oil producers. The UAE announced on Thursday that he will serve as president at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Dubai from November 30th to December 12th. The event will see 190 countries discuss how best to limit rising global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels. Al Jaber is also chairman of a state-owned renewable energy firm. But climate activists have argued that his appointment as COP28 president could represent a conflict of interest that undermines the summit's climate goals. Meanwhile, in Europe, Sweden has discovered the continent's largest deposit of rare earth metals. The discovery of over 1 million tons of rare earth oxides was made in Kiruna, in the far north of Sweden. State-owned mining company LKAB announced the news on Thursday local time. Rare earths refers to 17 different elements used in items like mobile phones, electric vehicles, and even missiles. Currently, no rare earths are mined in Europe. The discovery could see a reduced reliance on China, which supplied 98% of rare earths used by the EU in 2021. And finally, scientists have released footage of hundreds of thousands of South American river turtles hatching in what is known as the world's largest single gathering of turtles. Taken by EcoVale, a partner of the Wildlife Conservation Society, the video shows turtles emerge from their shells and crawl to a nearby river. The event takes place every year along the Guapore Itenes River, which is situated on the border between Brazil and Bolivia. Some 80,000 female turtles lay eggs on the river's sandy beaches in late September. The eggs hatch between mid-December and early January. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Hello, I'm Lee Ji-hyun with the latest weather updates. It feels like much of Korea is going through all 4 seasons this week. And this morning, we had a rainy start to the day, which helped to wash the dust away and ease the dryness in the air. Monsoon-like levels of rain on Jeju and the south coast are easing up, with temperatures staying on the warmer side. Speaking of which, many south coast regions in Jeju had record-high January morning temperatures. Well, despite heavy showers and strong winds, parts of Jeju saw daily lows above 20 degrees Celsius. Then we're going back to the winter weather again, with a massive amount of snow in the forecast for the east of Gangwon province tomorrow, with more than 20 centimeters in the forecast continuing into Monday. But the rest of the country will see light rain instead this weekend. Then temperatures will fall back to norms next week. Next Tuesday, we're waking up to a low of -7 degrees Celsius here in the capital. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And those are the headlines at this hour. Up next, we have our panel session during which we address the art of translating Korean literature. Do stay with us.